Several years ago, I bought my wife 30 baby chicks for Mother's Day. That's a mistake right away if you haven't done that before. And I brought them home, and I told her she had to keep them warm because we don't have all the lights that we have up here. I think we could hatch chicklets up here pretty easily. But I told them they had to be kept warm for several days, and she didn't know where to put them. I said, well, put them in the bedroom. And she said, well, what about the smell? And I said, well, they'll get used to it after a while. And so then I had to sleep out in the garage that night. But she got into the chicken business. And the first year, she made over $1,000 raising chickens and producing eggs and selling eggs. And I pointed out to her that it cost me $1,100 in chicken feed. So I offered her $500 not to raise chickens, which is what the government has taught me to do for years. And she said, well, why should I give up raising chickens? Because I made $1,000 last year. So I lost that battle, but it taught me that I'm not very much of an economist. And I think that's one of the issues that we often wrestle with here is the economics of farm injury and farm health issues and those kind of things. And I want to address that a little bit today and to try to put it in perspective a little bit. Using a particular case study. And I do apologize, George Vernon, who is the attorney that I've worked with over the years, was supposed to be here. I actually got him to do the presentation, and he ended up being in Slovakia this week doing a training with some lawyers over there. Okay. In 1975, 76, I was here in Minneapolis finishing up a degree at the University of Minnesota, and my first child, Libby, who happens to be a lawyer now, I've never lost so much of an argument with her, but she's gotten very good over the years, but she became quite ill, and we ended up in the Children's Hospital over in St. Paul, and I was earning $7,000 a year. I think that almost should be criminal for graduate students today. I think they're trying to organize, but within a couple of days or 3 or 4 days, her medical bills ran up to in excess of what I was earning that year, and it ended up leading me to take a job down at Waseca and teaching there for a while, but it taught me some about the economics. And I think there was a very strong potential that I would have dropped out of school because the cost of that health care that occurred while I was a graduate student and had very, very limited coverage. And so it became a significant life-changing, life-altering kind of decision to either drive on, and we were able to keep on with that secondary job that we had. But when I moved to Indiana, Purdue, I was interested enough to see what kinds of problems that economic impact had on the whole issue of injuries when we first got started. And some of you may be aware of some of these people. Roger Tormolin, who was my first PhD student, looked at doing some economic modeling of injury, especially those that led to disability. And then Mark Pershowitz did a little bit of work, which I think was quite instrumental at the time, looking at how little money was being spent in the area of farm safety, farm injury prevention, and that was really got a lot of attention at the time, and we were basing it on the actual dollars that were being spent by USDA and others to prevent these problems from occurring. And then this got me in political hot water. Was in Indiana, farm workers were not covered under worker comp, and I felt that was a mistake, and I had a graduate student work on the costs of not having farm workers covered by worker comp insurance, and not everyone agreed with that work. They thought it probably shouldn't have been done, but I thought it was important to raise the point that farm workers are generally not covered in many states by worker comp coverage, and so when something bad does happen, the door is there, they leave, and there's very little benefits for them. There wasn't a whole lot of work at the time done on economics in agricultural safety. There was some early work we found over in Ohio by Stout and Darby, and then Hanford and Burke and Fletcher and others did some work at the National Safety Council. Pfister did some things. I know there were studies done in other fields looking at the cost of injury, but those that directly related to agriculture were pretty slim. And so I've always been interested in that. In fact, I just finished a graduate project looking at the cost of implementing the OSHA standards on grain storage. And there are some significant questions as to how we're going to do this without having to change the model of how we operate in agriculture. So there are some reasons why we should be doing more of this kind of work. One of them is to really get a better handle on what are the costs to us from injury. I don't think we don't have a good handle on this. We need to be able to help prioritize. What are the big ticket items? What are the high value injuries that we have to deal with that everybody has to pay for? Whether it be, we've wrestled with that with motorcycle helmets in Indiana. We knew what the cost was, but the emotions were much higher, and we repealed our motorcycle helmet law. Not because of evidence of cost, but because of the emotions involved with people wanting that freedom. Also, we need to be able to compare with other industries. We need to look at how do we provide further justification for investments of dollars in the area. We don't have good evidence to do that. I mean, we have that altruistic sense of that life is important and children's lives are important, therefore we should do something. I think there also needs to be an economic side of this to generate the support that we need. The injury costs a lot of money. We're going to talk about that in a particular case study. I think there needs to also be some means of providing fair and equitable distribution of cost, especially in civil litigation. That area is so, in my mind, screwed up. And I want to give you just a real quick example. I've testified in probably 125 cases over the years. And let me give you an example that probably should trouble us. 2 incidents involving 2 tractors, same model, same make, similar years, both of them involving a jump starting situation where the farmer starts the tractor on the ground, tractor starts up, rolls over, kills both people. In those cases, one of them Mississippi, one in Iowa. One of them involved a white farmer in Iowa, and the awards were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. In Mississippi, it was a burial award, about $10,000 was finally awarded. The farmer in Mississippi was a black farmer. Do we distribute the cost, the impact equitably, or do we do it on other means that sometimes, which should trouble us? And it did trouble me because it didn't seem fair. It was not based on any good evidence. I've been on similar cases involving migrant seasonal farm workers. There was a case in Utah, which was, to me, was a criminal case. It should have been a criminal case. And the jury, 12 white, ruled against a farm worker's family who was killed. The farm worker was killed. And the jury awarded that farm worker $800 for burial costs. It blew me away that I was sitting in there watching this transpire, and again, what was the evidence? What were they using to determine the allocation of that economic settlement, that payout? And I also think that having a better understanding of the economics of injury would help raise awareness to farmers especially of what it's really costing them. I think what we do is we play economics with sort of a gumball approach, gumball machine approach. There's a jar of gumballs floating around. Could somebody make sure those get passed out? I can't see, but I left it on that table. And there's enough gumballs for everybody here. I have to remind you that there are choking hazards associated with gumballs. And if you have a problem, keep passing around. You can take 2. There's plenty for this base, okay? 1 in your pocket for later, and then you can. I had to take a half hour to explain why I had a box of gumballs in my carry-on package coming up here on Wednesday. They looked odd. They hadn't seen 200 gumballs before in a package on a carry-on before. But anyway, I think our public policies and perceptions have done little to change how we look at the cost of injury because we've hidden them. One of my concerns about the Healthcare Reform Act is that are we going to further hide the cost of injury because it becomes invisible to us? But our approach, I think, again, is based on this model of a gumball machine. Last winter, I restored about a 75-year-old antique gumball machine. I have very little to do in my life, and sometimes at night, sometimes at night I get a little stressed, and so I actually take on little projects like that. I love to tinker. I was an old VOAG teacher, and I stripped down a non-working gumball machine that had been used for years, and it was just full of candy or pieces of candy and gummed up, and I got it working. It's a beautiful gumball machine. Got it for very little or nothing at a flea market on my way to Chester, Illinois one morning. And then I learned a little bit about economics, just like my wife's chickens. Is that in 1965, a gumball cost about 1/2 cent. So those gumballs that I'm passing around cost me at Toys R Us, because that's the only place I could find the appropriate size gumball, was 12 cents. The difficulty of this whole discussion is that the nature of the machine, the system hasn't changed in all those years, in the time it was built. The availability of gumballs has become kind of limited. Either it's little tiny ones or great big ones. I got to find ones that fit. Size matters, otherwise they don't go through the gumball machine. The cost of the gumballs exceeds the cost of operation. I set it up in my office. I lost about $6 on the first day. Okay? Everybody put pennies in, they got a 12-cent gumball. I mean, that's the way our government works today. Okay? You put a penny in, you get 12-cent gumball that somebody had to pay for. And in that case, so I took it home. I can't lose money like that. We don't get paid a lot at Purdue, but so it now sits on our piano in the living room. It's a beautiful gumball machine. My wife's not too hot about it, but I think I got a lot of work invested in this thing, so I want everybody to see my gumball machine. And so every time anybody comes, I say, don't use the gumball machine. It cost me 11 cents to have you use the gumball. I get a penny back, unless you're using 1955 pennies, which might be worth 70 cents. So then I can get something back on them. There's a higher expectation for consumers. You put a penny in, and they do want 12 cents back. I mean, we all know that. We all want a bargain, and so we have that changing perception. And then the availability of coinage is that someday we're going to lose pennies, and my gumball machine will be worthless. And so the availability of resources to put in the gumball machine, because it only takes pennies. It can't take nickels, dimes, quarters. I'd like to try to convert it, take quarters, then I can make a little money on my gumball machine. But you all understand this, how it applies to agriculture and how it applies to safety and health. And that we're working with models that sometimes don't work, and that sometimes we put the dime in, we don't get much back for it. Or sometimes we want more back from it than we actually have invested. Okay, moving on. In July through September of 2013, we had three auger cases in Indiana just this past summer. That one insurance company has paid out over $700,000 worth of worker comp. Now we've lost something here. What's happening? Have those guys gone out for bagels in the back? No, okay. All right. They were very nice guys. Okay. So $700,000 on 3 cases involving augers on worker comp payouts. One tractor fire that I just recently was involved in settling, the actual medical bills on that one tractor fire was over $800,000. Okay, the cost of a spinal cord injury, I've been involved with several of those. Just the medical and rehabilitation cost to get home is over $1 million. In 2012, we estimate that about $8 million were lost in farm injuries that did not include permanent disabilities or the cost associated with those fatalities, 26 of them that occurred in 2012. There's a lot of money that floats around, but we don't see it. It's become pretty transparent to the farmer, to the others that are involved with this, to us. So it's very hard to sell this concept to any farm group or to our deans, because we can look at shatter losses on a header of a combine and tell you exactly from the back of the combine how many bushels per acre we're losing and calculate that over so many million acres and come up with these numbers. It's hard to do that with respect to agricultural injuries. I'm going to give you one case study that George Vernon and I worked on together and just walk through this and give you a sense of just one very, very simple case. And this is not by means the largest that I've been involved with. The largest I've ever been associated with was a illegal migrant worker that was had no residency, was living in the attic of a farmhouse, and was run over in a jumpstart case, and the attorney for this filed a claim against the farmer for $140 million. I I have all the documentation. They didn't get 140 million, but it sure gave everybody something to think about in that process, of, especially the company. And so let's just walk through this particular case, is that we have a person who's 48 years old. He's working on a peach operation, and he's mulching in February the prunings that are between the rows with a mower and a tractor. And he gets off to pull out branches that are stuck in the front of the mower. He leaves the PTO running, and everything's operating. And he's down there pulling branches out from under the mower that have become stuck. He slips and he falls into the power drive line. His clothing becomes wrapped on the power drive line. I don't have to get into all the details here. But injuries were his left arm was ripped off at the shoulder, parts of his arm were spread about, his left hand was severed on the ground, had a large open wound on his chest, he broke upper right arm and broke ribs, had permanent disfigurement. His surgeries were rather complex over a period of time, and I won't get into all those details there. Oh, sorry. As an outcome, he wasn't able to work for 11 months. The plaintiff's experts in this particular case asserts that he will not likely be able to continue his work, that type of work, until he's age 65. And the farmer agreed to provide employment, permanent employment, till the age of 65. It was a rather old operation. He needed personal assistance in order to go through his daily activities, cooking, shopping, and some of those other kind of things. Some of the damages that were argued in this particular case from the plaintiff was that he needed personal attendant care for 4 to 12 hours a day during that period of time, and the cost of that care at $20 per hour projected a lifetime loss of about $1 million to $3 million. The defendants came back and argued that he was just doing fine now. It had been 3 years since the accident, and he was able to take care of himself a little bit more. And there was a discussion that he was going to return to Mexico, where the cost would be a whole lot less. There was arguments concerning pain and suffering and his mental state, because he was no longer able to function or be in public. He didn't want to be in public. He didn't want to do things anymore because he was basically ashamed of his appearance. The plaintiff asked for $5 million in pain and suffering. The defendants offered $250,000. There's a summary of the conflict between the two entities, the plaintiff and the defense. And George was heavily involved in these negotiations, but I was a sideline person. I could watch all this thing taking place. And so it ranged between $6.3 and $8.3 million that were claimed. We're talking about fairly big money. This is one case. And then the uncontested damages from the defendants came out to about $316,000. That's what they agreed to. And then they contested the long-term care and some of the other things under pain and suffering. And so there was a conflict again between the two. The plaintiff wanted about somewhere between $6 and $8 million. The defendants offered between $5 and $800,000. And it was settled, and it was sealed. So I don't know what it was actually awarded, but it's somewhere in between those two. And that's just one very, very simple case. And quite frankly, the amount that was settled there was larger than all of the money that for 20 years per year that USDA was invested in ag safety and health. And that has always struck me for 20-some, 30-some years that I've done litigation, is how big these settlements are and how it's so much more than the money that we're investing in preventing of these problems. And so I think it's a question that we need to look at, because most of you are ignorant of what goes on in these litigations. I mean, most of you, I know I've talked to many of you over the years, and you don't want to get involved in this confrontational type of thing, and yet there's a huge amount of money that exchanges hands. One of the most recent cases I've testified in, the award that was given by a jury of 12 of our peers was about $170 million on 2 burn cases. Most of it was punitive. And it was, it just blew me away that the jury was so sympathetic to these 2 injured parties. It's going to be appealed. They'll never get $170 million, but they're going to get there'll be a huge settlement that's associated with that particular incident before it's all done. And you just think about even if it's only $50 million, what impact would that have on agricultural safety and health? Questions I just want to raise in closing is that the economic impact of injury can be used to influence an awful lot of things out there, such as adoption of safe work practices. I raised the question early, does universal health care have a potential to hide the real cost of injury? Are we going to just bury it deeper and deeper and deeper, and nobody's going to know what really those costs are? Does the current marketing practices that we have in agriculture prevent more rapid introduction? The ROPS question has come up as we've seen the increased price on ROPS. Are some of the costs of introducing new technology going to be threatened by the potential for litigation on older units that need to be retrofitted? Does our cheap food policy still affect the safety and health of workers? That's a wonderful discussion I don't hear much, but I think our cheap food policy has an awful lot to do with the health and safety of farm workers out there. I'd like to close, and I went to the farmer's market. If you missed the farmer's market over on the Nicollet Mall yesterday, it's an incredible farmer's market. Got up early, met a bunch of the farmers that are selling their stuff there, and I picked up a potato, and I was thinking about that, and I carried this potato around all day yesterday. And last week I dug my potatoes. Every year I plant 5 pounds of Kennebec, 5 pounds of Norland Reds, and my harvest last week was about 160 to 180 pounds of potatoes from 10 pounds. And I think that's a wonderful multiplication concept of economics that we ought to be thinking about. Are we planting enough seed? Are we planting the right seed? Are we cultivating it to get a 15, 20 time return on our investment? And we ought to be doing that. And just take a little potato seed, you plant it. There's no reason there should be any hunger in this country because there's plenty of ability to produce food. There's no reason there shouldn't be enough money to invest because we see it moving around a lot. The question is, are we doing it so it's being cultivated to bring about a response, a return on our investment that allows us to really address some of these problems, and everyone can see that things are getting better for people out there. So thank you for taking the time, and I'm not an economist, but I think that we all need to be concerned about the investments that we make in economically in agricultural safety and health, and we should be seeking for our greatest response or greatest return as we possibly can.